How much has COVID-19 changed the US election? A president who only occasionally wears a mask and mocks others who do. A contender who says Donald Trump is playing with lives. Will this coronavirus prove terminal to one man's hopes of sitting in the Oval Office? This is Roundtable. Good to have your company. I'm David Foster. More than 200,000 American lives have been lost to COVID-19 so far. In this US election, is there anything more important to the voters on whom both Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden are relying for their futures? This is a US election contest like no other. A campaign in the middle of a pandemic, a health crisis, an economic crisis, and a president who's been in hospital. COVID-19 has shaped Democrat Joe Biden and President Donald Trump's fight for the White House, from their policies to campaign rallies. As Biden remarks on coronavirus in his nomination acceptance speech.
We'll make the medical supplies and protective equipment that our country needs, and we'll make them here in America.
Trump promises older Americans that they will get the same medicine for coronavirus as he did.
You're going to get the same medicine. You're going to get it free, no charge. And we're going to get it to you soon.
And it is sure to be at the top of many voters' lists of concerns. So how important could coronavirus be in deciding the final outcome on the 3rd of November? Very pleased to say we can welcome to this particular round table out of Washington, D.C., the U.S. Capitol, Christopher Metzler, a Republican strategist. We also say hello to David Smith, the Guardian's Washington correspondent, somewhere else in that big city, and Laura Fink, a Democratic strategist and Rebel Communications chief executive. She's in San Diego, California. Great to have you all with us. David, as an impartial observer, I want to ask you, do you think this election has been shaped by COVID-19?
Yes, I think that is the defining issue of the 2020 presidential election. And I suspect future historians may well look back and say, in January, February, Donald Trump was in relatively decent shape for re-election. I remember being in the East Room of the White House the day he brandished a copy of the Washington Post announcing that he'd been acquitted in his Senate impeachment trial, which now feels like a lifetime ago. At that point, I think he was confident of his chances. But as in so many other walks of life around the world in so many countries, I think the coronavirus did change everything. And in particular, Donald Trump's mishandling of it really changed everything. He's consistently downplayed the virus. He's urged states to open up and cease the lockdowns prematurely. He's ignored the scientific advice of medical experts, and the result is more than 215 deaths. More than 215,000 people in America have died. More than 8 million infected. These are the worst figures in the world, and they tell their own story. And of course, Trump himself became infected quite recently, and now only in recent days he's attacking quite openly his own expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci. And that, I think, however hard he tries to change the subjects to the economy, to law and order, to culture wars, it keeps coming back to the coronavirus as the decisive issue in this election.
Christopher, I've got to give you the chance to respond to that. Mishandled the pandemic, says David Smith?
Well, I've heard a number of people say that the president has mishandled the pandemic. I do not believe that the president has mishandled the pandemic. In fact, the president's challenge is really between the health of Americans and the economy. Look, the bottom line is, if this economy continues to be shut down, if this economy does not continue to grow, really the pandemic would be of no moment, because the fact of the matter is we'll have nothing to come back to. I do think that as it relates to some of the things that the president's doing, the president is looking at issues of treatment. He's looking at issues of testing. He's looking at all of those kinds of things, and frankly, against a backdrop of media vitriol. Everything he does, there's absolutely nothing he can do right here, because everything he does, this issue has become so politicized that it is less about the treatment and the cure, should one become available, and more about the politics of Donald Trump and the politics
of 2020. Was it a good or a bad thing? Was it a good or a bad thing that he got COVID-19, Christopher, for him and the election campaign?
I never think that it's a good thing that anyone would get COVID. To me, that question is a bit odd. I don't believe that it's a good thing.
Not in the slightest. I'm asking if it has damaged his election chances or helped his election chances.
Well, I don't believe that it has damaged his election chances at all. The question is really, how are we going to proceed in addressing the health concerns? How are we going to proceed in addressing the economic concerns?
Laura, let me ask you, you are a Democratic strategist, you run a PR company. If you were advising Joe Biden, what would you tell him to do differently when it comes to his campaign and coronavirus?
Well, leaders during times of crisis have an opportunity to take a nation that is primed to support them. And so leaders, and in this case, President Trump really missed that opportunity. And we saw with governors of several states, New York, Michigan, California, and in leaders around the world, I think about Jacinda Ardern, you can capitalize on crisis by leading. And because people really want to come together during these times of crisis, and coronavirus is no exception. So I would say that Trump really missed the mark on that. And where does that
That isn't really what I was asking you, because I know you're bound to knock Donald Trump. I'm asking you about Joe Biden. You are a Democratic strategist. Let me ask you about Joe Biden. What would you advise him to do differently when it comes to the pandemic?
I understand. And in that vein, as I was just saying, that is what leaders are looked to. Now, Joe Biden is running. And so he took the mantle of leadership and led as if he were in office, even though he was not. And I think that is a strategy that I would recommend, which is why I was sort of connecting those two things. Americans want to see, and citizens across the world want to see leaders take the reins and give guidance with respect to how to behave, how to confront both the health crisis and the economic crisis. We saw Joe Biden do that throughout these past months, talk about testing and tracing, physically wear a mask, listening to scientists and scientific experts. Whereas in contrast, the Trump campaign has been all over the map, calling it a hoax, downplaying the recommendations of scientists, politicizing the issue of masks at his own rallies and beyond. And I think Joe Biden really walked into the stride of a leader to demonstrate that he's fully capable after Election Day of taking on this crisis that we know will last.
I threw the question to Christopher. Was it a good or bad thing that President Trump got COVID from his point of view regarding the election, not regarding his health? From Joe Biden's point of view, was it a good thing that the president contracted the disease from an election point of view?
Well, I'll stand with my colleague and say that I don't think it's ever a good thing to have someone contract what is a deadly
both
disease.
Of you know exactly what I mean. I mean, in terms of his election hopes, please.
I just think it's important to note that, because these are very politicized times and there shouldn't be politics around any individual's health. That said, I think, again, it's about Trump's handling of the virus, and when you have events where if you can't keep people around you safe, it begs the question, how can you be asked and expected to keep the American people safe when your own inner circle, with all of the possible security measures, it really does beg that question. Right. And I think we saw it reflected
Let
in
me
the
go to David, since I'm not going to get a straight answer from either of you on that particular issue. You're both trying to be very, very nice about the whole thing and say you wouldn't wish ill health on anybody. But David, let me throw this one to you. good or bad for Joe Biden that President Trump got COVID? Good or bad for Trump that he contracted the disease from an election point of view?
I think from an election point of view, it was bad for Trump, precisely because it did illustrate that he can't even keep the White House safe, never mind the whole nation. And from my experience as a reporter going there, it's been very vivid that pretty much all the journalists, all the camera operators constantly wear masks and take care to physically distance, whereas the White House staff and obviously the president himself have just been ignoring those public health guidelines pretty much all year. And you see Trump sometimes standing shoulder to shoulder with others. And ultimately, it was perhaps that event with Amy Coney Barrett in the White House Rose Garden, where certainly several administrations.
With regards to how it plays out into the wider public, to the American voters, wherever they happen to be, but away from inside the Beltway, Washington, D.C. itself. How do you think his handling of the disease itself, as he got it, may have benefited or hindered him electorally?
You know, I think as so often with his real hardcore base of support, there might have been some positives, some gains there. The way he tried to turn it around with very sort of macho posturing. There was even a report that he'd thought about coming back to the White House, pretending to be old and frail, and then ripping open his shirt to reveal the Superman logo. And at one of his rallies, I think just yesterday, some of his supporters were chanting Superman, and he said he felt like that. So I think that kind of bravado plays quite well with the Trump base. But overall, I would still say it's a net negative for him, because that is only a relatively small portion of the country. It's certainly less than half. I think for the majority, it was the final proof that he can't handle this pandemic, and just an illustration of his recklessness, his irresponsibility, his ultimately sort of receiving his comeuppance.
Okay, Christopher, your thoughts on what you've just heard from both David and from Laura. Then I've got a couple of questions for you.
Well, there are a couple of things in terms of the president, and it's always interesting to me that there are conversations about his hardcore base and his hardcore base not being enough to win re-election. Remember, in 2016, it was not just his base that caused him to win. There were several people who voted for him who are not members of his base, number one. Number two, as it relates to this whole, because I hear this all the time about he has mishandled the virus. Listen, like any other president, are there things that he could have done more effectively? Yes. But when there is such a heightened political backdrop, look, if the president had said, I wanted to do contract tracing, we probably would have heard, oh, there's Big Brother, they're trying to follow you. Look, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what this president says or what he does. Everything is going to be politicized, and it's going to be politicized against him. And
well, it's all about politics, isn't it? So there's no surprise there. I want to turn it to the older voters, some of whom may have felt that they'd been left in the lurch, and both President Trump and Joe Biden have been down to Florida in the last few days to try and allay concerns or to build up support amongst this state that has so many retired people in it. We're going to hear first of all what Donald Trump had to say.
I'm moving heaven and earth to safeguard our seniors from the China virus, to deliver life-saving therapies in record time, and to distribute a safe and effective vaccine before the end of the year. And we're really doing it even sooner than that. You see what's going on. We have the vaccines getting ready to go. Seniors will be the first in line for the vaccine.
And this, of course, is the other side of the coin from Joe Biden's point of view. Same place, Florida.
I prayed for his recovery when he got COVID. And I'd hoped at least he'd come out of it somewhat chastened. But what has he done? He's just doubled down on the misinformation he did before and making it worse. So many lives have been lost unnecessarily because this president cares more about the stock market than he does about, well-being of seniors.
Christopher, just to come back to you on that one, Florida's been such a key battleground in so many different elections. It might be no different this time. And with coronavirus taking its toll, particularly among the elderly, this is an issue that they both need to address.
Well, it absolutely is an issue that they both need to address. I mean, in Florida, I own a number of medical testing labs where we test for the virus. We test hundreds of people daily, and we work in nursing homes. So the issue of the virus, particularly in nursing homes, and particularly in Florida, is something that has to be addressed. The question for the president is, who is seniors going to believe are able to handle this better, and who has their best interests
Well,
at
the
heart?
point that's being made, if I may interrupt, is that President
Sure.
Trump has basically said, look, let's the coronavirus rip through the country. We're absolutely fine. We'll be turning the corner tomorrow. Look, I'm fine. I don't wear a mask. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands, if not more than, well, let's say hundreds of thousands of people have died, among them a great proportion of senior citizens. So he's got a battle on his hands, perhaps there.
Well, there's no question that he does. I'm not going to pretend that he doesn't. He most certainly has a battle on his hands there, relative. And it's not only just about the deaths. I mean, part of the conversation in Florida has been with senior citizens, such as about the death, the fact that they have not been able to see their grandchildren, et cetera. And so there is that issue as well. And the question for the president is, can he convince this particular population that he is the person who will handle it best? That's an open question.
Okay. Laura, your thoughts on how old people are going to play? Senior citizens is rather nice, but old people are going to play in this election when it comes to COVID-19.
Seniors are one of the most significant voting blocs to move over into the Biden camp, which is different from the 2016 numbers that we saw. And that is by and large attributable to the pandemic. We know that seniors are concerned about the virus. They do not feel like it is out of control, and they know that it disproportionately impacts people of their age group who have pre-existing conditions as well. And so I think that they've made their choice pretty clear. By and large, they've moved over into the Biden camp. I think that's one of the reasons why Biden looks strong in Florida. And of course, Florida is a complicated state. Seniors aren't the only demographic there. But if we want to talk about looking back on this election, should Biden come out on top, it will be seniors and women that will have brought him there. And again, this pandemic cannot be politicized when people know that it's a matter of life or death. They really are looking to science, as we've seen over and over again, science and scientists, medical experts, and they understand that it's a false choice to say open the economy or take care of the virus. They know that they go hand in hand. Seniors are no exception.
Or you can do what President Trump has done and come out saying, I've beaten this Chinese disease, as he calls it. I am, metaphorically, if not in terms of ripping his shirt open, I am Superman. That might win him votes.
Well, I do think that wins him certain subgroups. It certainly energizes his base. But Americans also know that he received treatments that are unavailable to them because they haven't passed FDA testing. He had the best medical opportunities, and they know that those may not be available to them. So this election will be won or lost on healthcare and on the coronavirus response, both of which President Trump has been lacking. And we see it in the numbers, and we see it in the subgroups, and we see it in those swing voters moving from one camp to the next.
Let me throw this one back to Christopher, and then David, I'll come to you. Laura makes the point that he got care that nobody else got. And I saw in our notes that you did with our producer that you said at least this shows that he can get it like everybody else and that he can come out the other side. Well, my point to you is you can come out the other side if you've got round-the-clock care, if you've got a helicopter to take you to hospital, if you've got personal physicians, if you've got access to the best drugs. To say that he's done it and everybody else can do it is well, it's stretching it, isn't it?
Well, were I advising the president, I would not have advised him to say that. Because in fact, look, the reality is, I'm in the healthcare profession. The reality is that in fact, he did receive treatments that not everyone can receive. And so I would agree, it is a bit of a stretch.
And you would have said, don't do that, would you?
Yeah, I would have said not to do that. You know, the reality, the experimental drugs that he received, it is not like you can go to your doctor and get them. You know, that's just not how this works, given the healthcare system in America, given the cost of these things. So I probably would have said something different, which is let us see how we can beat the virus together, rather than you two can be quote unquote cured. From a messaging standpoint, I was not comfortable with that.
Given that President Trump has said some pretty extraordinary things during the course of the last 4 years, since he won the last election, and indeed before that, do you think people were amazed, appalled when he said regarding coronavirus, inject disinfectant, or did it just go over the heads of a lot of people, if not into their veins or muscles?
Well, I mean, I think it just, you know, I mean, this president is like unlike any other president we've seen or experienced. And I think people, for the most part, you know, just kind of wrote that off. I mean, from the perspective, and of course, he would say that that is not what he said, or that's not what he meant. He, of course, and
well, he did say it. I mean, he may say that he meant it sarcastically, but we've all seen that. Make our own minds up on that one. David Smith, let me come to you. Is this election going to be decided because of the pandemic itself, or because of the knock-on effects, perhaps, of the pandemic, the economic devastation, the 39 million, I think I've read, jobs lost at the moment? It was 20 million back in May, the greatest since the Great Depression. Is that what's going to decide it? Trump said he'd make America great again. People feel better about their jobs. Although jobs went up, they're rock bottom again now.
Yeah, and earlier this year, his rallies were toying with the slogan, keep America great. And it's interesting to see how that has disappeared now. And we're back to make America great again, or sometimes make America great again. Just on the previous point, by the way, yeah, it's fascinating how among elderly people above 65, Trump won them by 7 points at the last election. This time, polls show he's down by 10 points or even 20 points in some cases. But I think probably first and foremost is just the health impact. I think more than 215,000 people dead. Any president would struggle to escape that as being the dominant issue. The virus is surging again now. States that were not so badly affected before, with increasing hospitalizations, this is not going away. I think first and foremost, it's a public health issue, but you're right to point out the economic consequences as well. If anything, that's possibly been underreported by the media, just how many millions of people are out of work and suffering. I think Democrats like to point out Trump will be the first president to actually have a net loss in jobs. And the polls suggest that whereas the economy was always his strongest suit, that whatever else was going on, people still rated him higher on the economy than Joe Biden. Even that has now crumbled, and Biden leads on the economic issue. In many ways, the health issue and the economy are very hard to disentangle. I think both of them right now suggest that Trump is heading for a defeat. And polls suggest that.
But you see, the thing is,
race relations and
the thing is, David, sorry to butt in. As they always say in politics, it's events, dear boy, it's events. So this happened and Trump couldn't control it. It was what he did with it that may well define him. I'm just wondering if it carries on into next year and longer than that, whether in fact either Trump himself, President Trump himself, or Joe Biden, if he is the successor, will be able to do any better than we've seen so far. What's the sense of that?
I think Joe Biden talks about having a specific plan, which includes listening much more closely to the scientists. Now, if he came under pressure to have a new sort of national lockdown, I can imagine that would be very controversial, and Biden's popularity might suffer if he followed through on that. If he goes for a national mask mandate, I'm sure there would also be backlash against that. It'd certainly be no picnic for Biden to inherit this situation. But of course, the great unknown here is a vaccine, which experts suggest, may well come along at some point next year. I'm sure it would take time to distribute to sufficient numbers of people, but by the end of 2021, at least, we might be in that situation of feeling that the virus is more and more in the rear view mirror. Biden, of course, would also have a tremendous job to do in terms of rebuilding the economy.
Yes.
But yes, I think there are warning signs from the rest of the world and what we're seeing in Britain and mainland
Indeed.
Europe right now, that whoever's in charge, this virus is very unpredictable and difficult to deal with.
David, thank you very much indeed. Well, hopefully this election's in the rear view mirror pretty soon, although, of course, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, whatever the result. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Laura. David Smith, out of Washington, D.C., correspondent for The Guardian. We appreciate having you on the program. Thank you so much for coming on, and good luck in whatever you do. From me, David Foster, the Roundtable team, goodbye for now.